much like a one-way transaction, and I wasn't expecting so much out of it. And thinking about it, and then starting to talk to friends about sort of how I was feeling and why it just felt like, a good time to maybe share that. And I hope I make it clear in the essay. I certainly don't have concrete answers as to how to fix these problems, or how to, and not that what I am doing to sort of address my own mental health is going to work for everybody. But I think what I was hoping to do was just sort of get people to talk more freely about how they're feeling. And sometimes it's really hard to do that.
This was an incredibly hard year for a lot of people. You and I were both very lucky that, we did have our health, and had, our families were okay. But for a lot of people, a lot. But I really related to your story about that sense of connection to other people just being lost. I mean, suddenly we're at home, we're much more alone than we're used to, even though we have these electronic, relationships, Zoom, it's very different. I just wonder, for you, also as an actor and as someone who's been very committed and very active in live theater, what it was like sort of really kind of stopping that in large part, and that absence of connection, because it's probably it's different, and I would think kind of more on one level than what a lot of us experience.
Well, I as a lot of people did, I went from working every day and being surrounded by people to then all of a sudden being alone in my apartment. I had come back to New York after filming The Prom for Netflix, and I was supposed to start directing Modern Love for Amazon. I had written an essay a couple of years ago that then I adapted into an episode of that show, and I had come back to start it, and we all watch things fall apart very quickly, and because there was no sort of time frame, people were thinking, is this a couple weeks? Is this a month? Is this the start date just kept getting pushed and pushed. And so I was alone in my apartment in New York. I was away from my boyfriend here in Los Angeles. And it felt sort of scary to be out in the world, certainly in New York at that time. And so that was a really hard adjustment. And I think because what I do for a living involves other people, and especially, the theater part of it is, you can't do that without an audience, or at least it's very hard to do without an audience. So, that I think was the sort of the sharpest sort of pivot, and the thing that I felt almost immediately was just so much of what I do as a profession is about sharing it with people, and about sharing experiences with people. And, the theater community in New York is also a very social one, and you're going out with people after the show, you're seeing people before the show, and to have all of that go away that quickly. That was, I think, what kind of hit hardest, fastest.
Sure. And then you got involved with Cameo to as part of sort of fundraising effort. I've never done Cameo. I've heard a little bit of what it's like. I mean, when you started up, did you think of it as like this is a kind of performing, or it really depended on like the requests you were getting? What is it kind of like as someone who's a professional in this regard, suddenly kind of going on a script that is suggested by others?
Well, yeah, I kind of thought, I have friends that do it, and I have, friends that have purchased these cameos in the past. And so I was familiar with the concept. And it was right before Valentine's Day. So I was expecting a lot of just sort of like Valentine's Day messages, things like that. I thought there'd be a lot of, maybe questions about the Book of Mormon, or questions about falsettos, or things like that. But I wasn't expecting people to be so honest. And a friend of mine, brought that up to me the other day, that it really was, I think I was speaking with a lot of people who were much younger than I am, people who were in high school, people who were maybe in college, and I was really really encouraged and really inspired by the fact that they so easily reached out and asked for what they needed or what they were in need of, because that's just not something that I feel like uh, I'm comfortable doing, and certainly I think people of my generation are maybe not so comfortable doing. So to see these young people reach out so openly and so honestly, I thought was really amazing. And not, it just wasn't. I mean, and there were a lot of questions about the Book of Mormon, and there were a lot of people who were asking me to sing something from falsettos, or and so that was all great and fun. It was just the other piece, the other chunk of those messages that I wasn't expecting that.
Yeah, and I want to ask you about that because you write about it really beautifully in the piece, and I was struck that you got so many requests from young people identifying as queer who wanted you to say things like, you are okay, you are enough, you're going to be all right. And it's Pride Month now, and I wonder, looking back at your own journey as a gay man and thinking about myself, my own journey as a gay man, why does some of us want to be told in 2021 that we're okay and that we're enough? I mean, you had that desire, and at the same time, you were a person who's succeeded as an actor, as a writer. You are succeeding, looking at and directing. What do you think it is? And I know you really can only speak for yourself, but just as you think about it in your own kind of journey as a man.
I don't know. That's a good question. That's a very good question. I think, again, going back to the acting thing, it sometimes feels like, a very, I don't want to sound judgmental about it, but it can feel like a very self-serving profession sometimes, right? You're doing things to get sort of accolades or to get praise or to literally get applause from people, and that's sometimes the litmus of what's successful and how well you're doing at it. And it puts you in oftentimes, for me, it puts you in a little bit of a fragile headspace that you really are seeking out approval from people, often strangers. And that's the nature. I mean, I'm for any musical theater fans who are watching this, I think there's a line in Chicago, the musical Chicago, about it, that Roxy Hart has about, why are we in show business? It's because we didn't get enough love. Like, I'm paraphrasing it, but there's a phrase in that musical about it. And while it's sort of funny and it's sort of, flip, there's some truth in it that I think that people are looking for validation. And I think this past year just drove home the importance of that. And it's not about applause, or it's not about, ticket sales. It was just about how much we all rely on just daily human interaction with people, and to have all of that taken away so suddenly, I think that's perhaps why people were in such need of feeling a version of that normalcy again.
Yeah, we have done a call out at the Times just for Pride Month to talk to hear kind of stories of people who came out over the last year during the pandemic, and kind of what that. And because I don't know about you, but I mean, I vividly remember the first person who I told, I was gay. It was my godmother on a beach, and I was very nervous about telling my family, and she was sort of like the safe liberal in the family, and I thought it would be okay. And some of the stories we've heard were just really powerful, because it was a lot of people coming out, online, as one does. I mean, this is not how I came out in sort of the pre-internet age, and but that's the kind of communication and connection that was just so important, for so many of us, and the way that got sort of short-circuited. I wondered if it surprised you in the last year as it was happening, that you did feel that need, as you write about, to kind of hear that you were okay. That, I don't know, to what degree we get to a point in life where we think we're fine, and we're sort of floating on constant a sense of self-esteem and self-worth, but then suddenly it hits you, and you do need some help. I wondered if that came as a real surprise to you, if you knew it was happening at the moment. And you write about this a little bit, of course.
Yeah, I mean, I think I tried to plow ahead as best as possible, and I think that's sort of what I was used to doing, and then I think a lot of people are used to doing that, and that sometimes when there's problems in your personal life, it's best just to try to fix them by yourself, and that seems easier rather than involving other people. And I mean, the internet and social media is like it's obviously a very powerful tool and can be used in a lot of different ways. And I think in this past year, I mean, was a lot of positive ways that we could interact with each other through social media. I sometimes have a hard time with it because I feel like it is also a space for people to sort of fire off things anonymously, with no consequences, criticisms, things like that. And with I mean, some of the nastiest things that have ever been said to me online are always somebody who has a private account. It's always somebody who has like, it's a private account. I can't see anything about you. And it's hard to sort of sift through those. And I, as a general rule, I just don't read comments anymore because I feel like it can be really hard to stomach a lot of that. But that being said, it is a helpful tool and it is a way to connect with people sometimes. And I feel like this past year, especially, I think it was a window for a lot of people, to connect with other folks. So I struggle with with my relationship with social media because on the one hand, it can be really helpful, but it can also really hurt sometimes.
No, I completely agree with you. Just for folks who are tuning in, we're talking to Rannells, the actor and writer, that he published this week on nytimes.com, and it's going to be Sunday's newspaper. Andrew, as you were kind of going through the lockdown experience, were hearing these requests from strangers on asking for cameo videos, telling them that they were okay. What was it that made you realize that you weren't okay? Was there kind of a moment or I don't know, when you were in your apartment, when not an easy epiphany necessarily, but you were like, something is actually kind of off here and how I'm dealing?
Yeah, no, I had a very, my best friend, Zuzana Shatkovsky, who I have been friends with since I was in high school, she pulled me aside and she came over to my apartment and she said, something seems off with you. And it wasn't until she said it that I realized I was sort of shutting out even my best friend. I wasn't talking to her honestly. And yes, we were in contact, and yes, I was, talking to her on the phone and texting with her, but I wasn't really being honest about sort of what I was feeling. And I had a couple other friends who said similar things, just, like, where are you right now? And what's going on with you? And, luckily for me, I had a close friend, who felt secure enough to reach out and say that to me. And I heard it, and I really took it to heart. And I'm so grateful that she did say something, because I think that I was, sort of drifting farther away from, my sort of general demeanor of happiness. And I didn't realize how far away I had gotten from that. So it was, I'm very grateful to her that she took the time and because it's hard, that's a hard conversation to have, and it's hard to hear, certainly, but she did it. So I'm very grateful.
No, it is. No, it is. I mean, that's the thing. Like, sometimes, like, as close as we are to people, right? You sort of can be wary of, like, intruding, in their lives, or like how to not jumping to assumptions or presuming too much. But I don't know. I think, for speaking for myself, one of the things I learned in the pandemic and the lockdown, and you write about this, was like the need to be able to reach out to other people and see how they're doing and acknowledge even in ourselves, that like we could be having really bad days,
Yeah.
and be, things can be going wrong, and that can happen. You um, during the editing work that we were doing the piece, and it's just for people to sort of understand how opinion pieces work. There's oftentimes like a lot of back and forth with authors, sort of in which editors ask for more information or can this be clearer, and you had a sort of a paragraph toward the end of the piece in which you talk about kind of how you came out of sort of the really challenging time and kind of the day drinking and the isolation. And one thing that we always struggle with as kind of writers is like how neatly to tell our story and like put kind of a tidy bow on hard times and like now everything is okay. And I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about that as a writer, as you were thinking about that, kind of how you wanted to tell that story. And like I think we make choices about how much sort of ugly detail to go into and then how pretty to make it sound when life is more complicated. I hope that makes sense as a question. I'm
Yeah.
just kind of
No,
as thought about it.
very much, very much. And it was, I think, the essay that I initially sent you, I think, was about twice as long as the
Yes.
one that was published. So, there was a little more, I don't want to say nuance to it, but there was more details about sort of how I got to where I was. And that's simply, sometimes, and I learned that when in writing my book too, like you just don't have the space for it and there's not the time and there's not the real estate. And I think my biggest concern about this piece in particular was that I didn't want to tie it up too neatly. And I didn't want it to appear that like, and now it's done and now everything is fine. And because it's a process. It's and I say it in the essay, and I've said it a lot this week to people. Like, just because you ask for help or you acknowledge that there's some sort of a problem or that you're unhappy, it doesn't mean that it goes away. And I guess that's what I was most concerned about within the sort of space that I had with you, was that I didn't want it to look too tidy at the end. And I think you were, extremely helpful in making sure that that was not the case, and not that I was, and again, that I'm not trying to claim that I have some sort of answer or some sort of fix, or I was just saying, and I'm hoping that maybe people will be encouraged to also reach out and also share their feelings with people. And but I guess that's always the tricky part about writing something like this, is you don't want to get to and here's the lesson I learned, like you don't want to get to that part too fast. um, and I imagine you struggle with that a lot as well, that like you're like, well, yes, we need a moral, but where do we put it in here? And I just wanted it to be as honest as possible.
No, it's so true. It's interesting. Our columnists, it's kind of old school for print, but our columnists Maureen Dowd or Ross, that they have to fit this 820 word formula in a way, and it's very hard to write 820 words. It actually is like, okay, how do you get all of the complexity and the nuance that you have? And that your first version, which was twice as long, was really beautiful. And you wrote about growing up in Nebraska, and more about your own journey. I hope people are able to see version of that. We're gonna questions from comments, but I had one. I mean, just as a massive theater fan who's really enjoying on stage, that sense of connection. Book of Mormon, falsettos, voice in the band. Was there an experience just with I'm sure with all of the casts you had an experience, but one where you had a particular sense of connection with the people that you were working with, where that sense of almost like kind of personal growth or just fun that you can get from working with the cast. I just wonder what it was like, working with those kind of companies, because they were kind of great ensembles for those those three productions?
Absolutely. I mean, the Falsettos cast, I've never had quite an experience like that before where everybody got so close so quickly. And I think a lot of it was the nature of the material, and everybody was so excited to be a part of that show, and I think such a fan of the show. And we were in such great hands with William Finn and with James Lapine, and that was a very unique and very special experience of doing that show every night. And it's one that I think very, always will think very fondly of, and it's probably my favorite thing that I've ever gotten to be a part of. Boys in the Band was very similar in that sense, because we were, celebrating the 50th anniversary of this show, celebrating 50 years of the gay rights movement, and we were a cast of all out gay actors, many of whom, we had known each other for a long time. I met a lot of those guys, right after college, and here we all were working together. And that was also a very unique experience, in that we loved doing that show together, and we loved being together. And Falsettos and Boys in the Band is one of the few shows that, like, people would arrive to the theater much earlier than they needed to, just so we could hang out, just to have like time. Like Jim Parsons and we sort of, our dressing rooms were next to each other, and we had a routine that I would bring in the newspaper, and he would come into my dressing room, and we would sit and read the newspaper and just sit in my, and sometimes not talk, but we would just have that time to sort of like just sit around together. And we would do it like an hour before we needed to be at the theater, which, who goes to work early? You know what I mean? What's that? And Falsettos, we did the same thing. We would show up, and everybody would sort of gravitate to Christian Borle's dressing room, and we would just hang out there. So I feel very lucky to have had two experiences like that. I mean, the Book of Mormon obviously was also like, a huge moment for me, and it's such a crazy experience. And I think because it was so much, and it was a lot sort of coming at us all, we were just trying our best, I think, not to be in a full-blown panic every day that, like, Oprah's coming to the show, Stephen Sondheim's here, and we're losing our minds that we were in the middle of that process. But with a little more experience under my belt, it's easier to sort of be grateful and be present in those moments. And sometimes I look back at the Book of Mormon, and it's like I have a whiplash, because things moved so fast.
I was going to ask you, did you know that success was going to come that fast with Book of Mormon? Like, I mean, you have great DNA in the creators and cast, but, it's sometimes hard to know. I mean, I remember Dave Stone, the producer of Wicked, talking about, people weren't sure.
Yeah.
I wonder with Book of Mormon, did you sort of see it coming, or when did you know it was like hitting the way it was going to?
It was, I mean, the response when we opened was so positive, and I think that we figured we would find an audience. I didn't know how big the audience would be, but I thought that, Trey and Matt obviously have a lot of fans, and I was like, we'll find our group, but I just didn't think it was going to be quite so universal as it was. But I don't think it was until like after the Tony Awards that then we realized, this was something sort of major for all of us. And, Nikki winning the Tony, and then, Josh and I were both sort of separately flown out to Los Angeles to meet with people. And things started moving, I think, faster than we expected. But again, we were the sort of the very grounding part about doing theater is that you have to do the show every night. So it's not like doing a movie and then it's done, and months later you're talking about it in press. Like, whatever was happening for us during the day, we had to go to that theater and do the show 8 times a week. So that's a very sort of, I think it's a safe place to be with so much sort of noise and so much excitement sort of swirling around you. At least, for 2.5 hours at night, you're going to do this like set thing, and you're going to, how that works, and how it ends. And there's something very, very reassuring
Yeah.
about doing that. Yeah.
One of the questions we got, and maybe it's an obvious one, but I do, is about falsettos. And so many of us have like a personal connection to that show, and young people who've said that that show helped them, in the process of coming out themselves. Wondered what what do you think it is about that show and its story that that does, sort of hit people so personally, and not to be highfalutin about it, but where show really can help you, sort of accept who you are, even love yourself a little more. That one in particular.
I think I mean, it's obviously a very beautiful love story. It's a beautiful love story for Whizzer and Marvin. It's a beautiful love story for Marvin and Jason. There's this story that develops between Trina and Mendel that's also really beautiful, and seeing Dr. Charlotte and Cordelia together in this relationship is like there's a lot of love in it, and I think the thing, because I was a huge fan of it. I saw it on the Tonys in '92, I believe, that they did the baseball number from Falsettos, and I just completely fell in love with that show from then. And there's something really powerful about this group of people, even though there are problems, and even though there's some shifting dynamics and roles sort of change. It's a chosen family, and it's a group of people that come together. To form this bond and to support each other, and I think that's why it resonates so much with queer people in particular, is because you do kind of have to sometimes choose a family, and not oftentimes it's because families don't accept who you are. A lot of times it's just logistics. I moved to New York when I was 18, 19, and I, over the years, put together sort of a chosen family because I was very far away from my family. So I think there's something very relatable about that in Falsettos specifically, that people can sort of look at and hang on to and see themselves in. So it's I had nothing to do with the creation of that show, but it feels like an incredibly personal one for me. It's one that really sits with me.
Just a last question for you, Andrew, and you get at this in the piece, but it's also about in your time in New York, I guess. When you came to New York, I think like in the late '90s, there weren't a lot of plays and musicals on Broadway about queer people. There certainly were a lot of plays and musicals that had, entirely a cast of entirely gay actors, certainly openly gay actors.
Yeah.
These stories, weren't really heard, and then like Pride Month would come along, and like maybe the New York Times one story in June about gay people to like check the box of Pride, And I just wonder what it was like when you came versus like that experience with Boys in the Band. And how do I want to ask this question? You know, not so much how far we've come. That sounds a little corny. But I guess for you, if you can remember early on, if you ever thought you'd be comfortable, being, on Broadway as an out gay man in a cast that frankly advertised itself,
Yeah.
in a proud way, identifying in that way. It can be, at least once upon a time, it was challenging in the acting world to be identified a certain way.
Yeah. Well, you would think that the musical theater would be the safest place
Right.
for a gay person to be. But I will say that, starting my career on Broadway in Hairspray and playing, getting to play Link Larkin and playing that part, it's not that I felt the need to be closeted, but there were people around me at that time who were encouraging me to be private. about it. And it was very confusing because I was 26 when I was cast in that show. So like that ship had sailed. Like I was real gay already and like dating people and living my life. And
Yeah.
then to sort of have people in a position of power sort of suggest that maybe tap that down a little bit if you want to keep working. That was really confusing. And it was because I thought, I was like, we're supposed to be in the most accepting business in the world, especially in musicals, that I was like, why am I even having this conversation at this point? But unfortunately it was. And that was, that was in 2005. So, things have certainly changed. But did I think that I would then years later be back on Broadway and be celebrated for being out and gay and being with all of these amazing actors who all have very successful careers, who have not compromised who they are at all? No, I didn't see that coming. And that was it was a really empowering summer doing that show with those guys, because I was able to look around. And again, a lot of them I had known for many years, right after we sort of moved to the city around the same time. And to see that everybody was able to find some success on their own terms was really empowering. And that we got to do it as friends was even more so. So I hope that that's not the case for younger actors now, that those conversations still happen, but I'm sure they do.
Sure they do.
I'm sure they do. And it's, as much as there are shows like Boys in the Band and casts like ours that prove that you can do it, I'm sure people still struggle with that professionally. And that's too bad, because ultimately, we're actors, we're being hired to be someone that we're not. And if we're good at it, then it shouldn't really matter what our personal lives are like. But I'm sure that's a whole other Instagram live, Patrick. We could talk about this all day. Yeah.
Good. So folks, thanks. Good. So folks, thanks everyone for joining us. You can see Andrew actually on Black Monday on Showtime right now. And check out the piece if you haven't on. Andrew, I guess the PS, any sort of theater plans in terms of performing at this point, or just you'll see?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very excited to get back to New York and to see this first wave of shows that will be reopening in the fall. I'm so excited about that. In terms of getting to be a part of anything, I think, new shows, I think, are still sort of slowly developing. I think the ones that are opening are going to be the ones that were already ready to open. So I don't think that I don't have any. So the long answer is no, I don't have any plans. But I'm looking for them. I'd love to come back to Broadway. Thank you. I'm sorry for my delay. I swear I know the difference between Eastern time and Pacific time, or maybe I don't, because clearly it didn't even occur to me to ask.
Yeah, I was doing it. I felt like I've lost my line. I was just, going for it. So it's all good.
Well, I'm sorry to leave you hanging there. Thank you so much for being patient with me.
Totally. All right. Take care.
Thanks. Bye, Patrick.
Bye.